thank you for joining us today on this topic. I hope you can all see my screen here, and if my audio or video starts to lose a little bit of quality, I might switch my video off just so that we can stay connected here. Just want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. I know that we're all going through some challenging times right now with the pandemic. And as many of you know, these issues are likely to persist with us into the spring or not necessarily be remedied right away. We want to commend all of you on your efforts to ensure that learning is continuing in your respective areas during these trying times, but also most importantly, thank you for your partnership as we tackle these difficulties together. So first, we're just going to start with the materials that we have together for you and some logistics. As you guys just signified by hitting that submit button, this meeting will be recorded for our official public records. And we also will have a transcript accompanied, so you should be able to see that on the bottom of your screen, which will help us with our note-taking and minute purposes. Transition here to the first item on the agenda. For those of you who are joining us for a second time, thank you for attending this session. And for those of you, this is your first time, welcome. So this is our second meeting that we're having through the strategic waiver process. And what we're going to do at this session is give you some updates and open it up for discussion using Menti to facilitate. Given the size of our audience and also because we're in this virtual capacity, it's going to be difficult for us to pass that mic around, if you will. So we're going to use the technology to gather your comments, questions, and ideas. And just in the spirit of this, since it's a little hard to kind of know who has questions and all of that, what I'd ask you to do is just hold your verbal questions till we have a pause like the slide that's shown in front of you right now. So anytime you see one of these red slides, if you just let us know what comments, questions, concerns, ideas you have, that would be a great time to do so. So throughout today's session, Marcy will be facilitating your information via chat. So you'll get resources included in there in chat. We also will be posting all of our materials from today. The agenda is already posted on the site. The slide deck is already posted on the site, but the meeting minutes and the recording will be made available after today's session. So going to our third slide here. If you didn't join us on January 7th, but you're interested in what we discussed and the materials from that session, you can use these slides to navigate over there. It's posted on the site on January 7th. We've got the agenda, the slide deck, also the Menti results from those of you who engaged in the survey, our minutes, and the recording. So just a little bit of a disclaimer for today. The information that we're sharing with you is subject to change. However, it's current as of today, and it's rooted in the laws, regulations, and OPI's policies for testing, accountability, and reporting. And the purpose of this meeting is to discuss with you folks the effects if these are approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So we're going to talk through some introductions and logistics, key activities that the OPI has going on right now, some immediate and strategic actions that we've taken, key documents and resources, and also engage in public participation and comment with you guys and some of our next steps. So I want to emphasize for everybody that public participation matters, and your comments are an integral aspect of our application process and our overall success. So there are several ways in which we're going to kind of engage in that today. As I mentioned, we're going to use technologies to the greatest extent possible. And it looks like everybody's done a great job so far on muting and unmuting yourself and making sure we don't have any of those fun distractions in this remote world these days. You can also share your video like we have done here. And so this is a great way for us to have community and connect and engage with you. If you don't have your name clearly visible in that participant panel, if you could just take a moment to rename yourself, and you do that by clicking on your name and then clicking more and renaming your first and last name. That's important for us for, again, those minutes and that official record of today's activity. So if you could do that, we would greatly appreciate it. And also if you could introduce yourself in the chat so we get to know where you're coming from. You know, are you a parent? Are you a district representative? Do you work at the OPI? You're a state partner, or do you come to us from somewhere else? So your affiliation would also be helpful. So some ways, again, that you can engage in this. You can chat if you have questions. So if you have a question, Marcy's really great at giving me a little thumbs up and an indicator that I need to pause for questions or any of that. So if you have questions and you don't really want to come off mute, you can interact with us through chat. For a verbal comment, if you'll just let us know who's speaking and if you're affiliated with a particular organization, that group, and if you're speaking on behalf of that group, and if you need any technical assistance, you can do that. And of course, you're going to get to participate also through our Menti features. So one of the things we're going to start off is just introductions, so you know who on the call is from OPI and in supporting today's session. As we make our introductions to you, again, if you could just submit in the chat who you are and where you're coming from. That way we get to know who you are and kind of see it from the audience, that, you know, broad cross section of folks that are listening in today. So I'll start. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashley McGrath. I'm the Assessment Director for the Montana Office of Public Instruction. I've been with the
Ashley, we lost your sound.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the heads up. I guess a question would be, where did I leave off? So my team here is going to introduce themselves in the order that is shown here. And so if you could introduce yourself, Julie, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Julie Mergel, and I am the Senior Manager over the School Innovation and Improvement Department. I oversee the federal programs, school improvement efforts, and the accountability system as it is outlined in the state ESSA plan. So it is great to see all of you today.
Thank you, Julie. Anne.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm Ann Bauer. I'm the Senior Manager. I am the Data Operations Manager in the Data and Technology Service Division. I was reading the line above. Can you tell I'm just a little bit nervous, but I'm happy to be here today, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Anne. Well, I think you're senior, so that's okay. Chantel.
Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantel Meterstaff. I am the NAEP State Coordinator, and my official role today is the note taker. And I've been with OPI for a little over 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel. And Marcy.
Hey everyone, I'm Marcy Fortner. I'm assessment specialist with the assessment unit here at OPI. Recognize a lot of names there in the participant panel. I am assisting today with monitoring the chat, sharing out links and information, and happy to see everyone here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcy. All right, so concerned stakeholders. So one of the things that we did together is we came up with a list of groups that we thought were persons likely impacted or affected if these waivers and this processes that we have underway were successful. And so it's really important for us, though, to make sure that we've captured as many affected groups and persons as possible. And so looking at our meaningful consultation process, if you think that there is a group that's not represented here that needs to be, we'd love to know who that is so we can make sure that we've provided them with adequate notice and information on these topics so they have an opportunity to comment. Again, this whole public participation is instrumental to our overall application process. This graphic here is really just intended to show you how the information from stakeholders flows up to the department, really how that is essentially implemented on the other end with any changes. So here, just kind of looking over at that timeline specific to the strategic waiver process is 36 days for public comment. However, we've got two things going on here, which my colleagues on the call are going to elaborate further later on: the addendum process, where we're at with that, and the strategic waiver process. So these are distinct and different, and we need public participation in both. But just to kind of outline the flow of the key steps that are happening in timeline aspects, this was opened up in December 23rd. It's open for 36 days. It closes on January 28th. Our application would be submitted to the U.S. Department of Education on February 5th, with the opportunity for them to make a determination on the process by no later than June 5th. So they could definitely make a decision sooner than that, but they have in statute the opportunity to take up to 120 days. So this is really just steps within the public comment process, the Section 84 process under ESSA, just a high-level overview of what that looks like. So the first thing, again, we want to do here is learn what groups you're representing as far as kind of our stakeholders on the call today. So we're going to use Menti to facilitate that. On the next slide, you're going to get information on the code so that you can actually participate in the survey. What's nice about the option for today is I've set it up at your own pace, so you can actually plug along faster than I'm moving or slower than I'm moving and navigate that way. And it's open for 2 days. So let's say there is information that we covered today that you wanted to share with your peers or your colleagues. What you could do is share the link, and it'll be open 2 days for them to actually participate in the survey as well. We've got 54 slides in total. As you can see, I'm on slide 11 here, and we've got 19 questions for you today so that you can provide us with input and feedback. So with the agenda, we've got 7 sections, and just again, kind of where to comment. So although we'll have questions for you to kind of go through this process, there might be questions we didn't think of or an answer that you need today. Again, during those red section points in the slide presentation, if you just want to let us know what those are at that point, that would be a great area within the agenda for you to let us know what your concerns are. So the first question here, and the code is 1041850. There are no spaces, and you just go to menti.com. We want to know where you're joining from. This will help us make sure that we've got geographical coverage across the state of Montana. Also, this information is really used at an aggregate level, and it's really just to make sure that, again, we've got that broad cross-section of stakeholders for reporting purposes with our application to the department. Wonderful. So as I mentioned, a nice thing about this is it's at your own pace. So as those come in, I know some of you, as far as getting your device set up, whether you use your phone, your laptop, or however you're navigating this, may take you a little bit of time to plug in that code. So as you're doing that, I'll move to the next question, but please continue to submit your response. The next question we have is, what's the size of the school district out of these options? And you may not belong to a school district, and that's okay. You can use that other code. And the next question on here is, what hat do you wear? So what's your primary role if you are coming to us from a school district? All right. So that wraps up the first point that we have on the agenda, those introductions and those logistics. Now we're going to transition over to some key OPI activities and give you the opportunity to learn a little bit more about those processes that I described from my colleagues on the call. So I've got Ann Bauer joining me, and I also have Dr. Julie Mergel, and I'm going to hand the ball over to them.
Thanks, Ashley. As you had mentioned, there are 3 different ways that we amend or change or alter or pause different parts to our ESSA accountability or federal regulations. And these 3 different ways of doing that have very distinct purposes. So there's one called an addendum process, one's a waiver process, and one is an amendment process. And the addendum process is the process that is happening right now for our accountability system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's really looking backwards of really kind of cleanup to anything that has happened previously that we're adding on to a waiver that we would already have. And so right now we did a waiver back in the spring where we waived the spring testing, and we waived the accountability system and the report card. And so that has caused an impact on our accountability system because we do not have any data to run the current accountability system. And so we have to go backwards and say, since we're missing a year of data from school year 2020, we somehow have to address that because we can't measure growth within our current system. So we're looking backwards to say, how are we going to address that issue? And we're doing that through an addendum process. And so that is due to the Department of Education on February 1st. They provided us a very particular template to kind of go through. And again, this is unique simply to the accountability system because we're missing that data. The second kind of thing that can happen is a waiver. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. But that's what we're talking about right now, is something that we want to pause within our systems, maybe pause testing, pause the accountability, but it's not something that's going to be a permanent change to our ESSA plan. It's just a moment in time, if you will. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. And then the third way, which we don't really currently have anything in the hopper, if you will, for amendments. But if that's something permanently we want to change with the ESSA plan, that would be something moving forward, not looking backwards, but rather looking into the future to say, we want to make a permanent change to something within our ESSA plan. And we're going to do that. We go through what we call an amendment process. So these are 3 very different things. And just kind of want to share with you that what we're talking about today really are in those first 2 columns, addendum and waiver. Ashley, next slide, please. So what does the addendum do? So we're talking specifically about that accountability system that we don't have growth scores. And because we don't have growth scores from 2020, we are not able to compare the growth that happened from 2019 to 2020 for our students. We are able to look at, for example, graduation, and we can measure graduation from 20. We can look at, for the most part, most of the students who are English language learners, we could look at the accountability system and data because pretty much over 95% of the students were able to take the WIDA access before the waiver came into play. And so we could look at that one. And then our 5th indicator in Montana, we have a total of 5 indicators. We could look at that one as well. It has college and career readiness and it has attendance. But as we started to look at that, we were starting to say, you know what, we have 2 critical areas that we're concerned about. And that is, when we look at growth in Montana, the way that we measure it is very dependent upon consecutive years. For example, if you are a 5th grader and you were in 2019 in an elementary school, and then in 2020 you were a 6th grader, and now the next time you potentially might be taking the test, depending on how this waiver that Ashley's talking about with you goes, you take the test in 21, you're now a 7th grader, and those scores get calculated, And then that's what kind of determines rank order and our accountability system overall. As we count up all those points, your school could be getting results of your growth that aren't really relevant to the school that you were in. And so our system of how we measure growth is really, really contingent upon consecutive years, not these gap years. And we felt like with the fifth indicator, when it came to attendance, that's something that's been very difficult to measure this past school year in 1920. And so we had made the decision then that we really wanted to talk about how we were going to address this. And the way that we've determined that we wanted to address this is to say, you know what, let's not identify schools, because if we can't measure growth and we can't really determine that attendance is good, and that's 2 of the indicators, then let's not do it if it's 2 out of 5. Let's take the timeline and say, let's shift everything forward a year. So we're going to shift everything forward. And so the next time that schools would potentially have data would be in 2022, where we could look at that growth, because we need 2 years of consecutive data. And that also means then we should shift forward the timeline for our long-term goals that are in our ESSA plan, because we're not measuring them. And then we should shift forward as well our targeted schools. And so you guys, there's 2, like, you can see these acronyms here. It's acronym heavy on this page. You can count the number of acronyms right there. And so I just want to touch base with you a little bit. So when we talk about our accountability system, what these mean, and that's critical because the next slide is going to be about the acronym TSI. So CSI is Comprehensive Schools and Improvement, okay? ATSI is Additional Targeted Schools and Improvement, and TSI is Targeted Schools and Improvement. So as mentioned, you take these 5 indicators that we have on performance, growth, graduation, EL progress, and then the 5th indicator on school quality and student success. And we add that all up and we come up with a score. And what we do is we rank order that. We say who's in the bottom 5%, or who has less than a 67% graduation rate for our high schools. And we do this every 3 years. And so if you end up in the bottom 5% of the amount of points that you get, you're designated as a comprehensive school. You receive support for 3 years to help kind of identify the needs and really look for that improvement for those schools. Then there's that special category called targeted. So there's kind of 2 types of targeted, if you will, which can kind of get confusing. But additional targeted is what we've been doing for the past couple of years. Additional targeted is when you have a particular subgroup and we take a look and say, how is that subgroup doing? Are they performing like the bottom 5% in CSI in that subgroup in and of itself? And if that subgroup, for example, if it's special education or economically disadvantaged, we have designated subgroups. If they're performing at that school in that bottom 5%, they are identified as what we call additional targeted school improvement. And we do that every year. And that status changes every year. And so I think what's critical to note here is when we're talking about this addendum, we're only able to address 2 things. We're able to address the comprehensive, the CSI, and the ATSI. So we're basically saying, because we can't measure growth and our 5th indicator attendance is touchy, we're not going to do it. We're not going to be able to do ATSI either, because we got to compare it to the comprehensive schools. So if we can't compare it to the comprehensive schools, we really can't run it. So we want to shift it a year. Ashley, if you could move to the next slide, because I want to talk about targeted for a second, about why there's this waiver that's going with the addendum. So we need to kind of cancel or suspend targeted, because targeted in the ESSA plan for Montana is very distinctly defined. It says that you have had 3 consecutive years where a subgroup of students have been consistently underperforming. And we have not ran the accountability system for 3 years in a row. It would have been last year, and so we couldn't do it. And because we've got a gap year from 20, and we don't know what's going to happen with 21, our definition is not going to work right now. And it's going to be a little bit of time until it will. And so it's not that we are, if you will, looking backwards to fix the targeted definition, but we need to pause it for a moment and suspend it at this point in time until we can get 3 consecutive years of data to determine if there are targeted schools that are consistently underperforming. So when we submit the addendum, we're going to be submitting that to pause the accountability system for this last year, shift everything forward, and then we're going to put this little additional attachment to it, this waiver that says, hey, right now we got to suspend our definition for targeted. So Ashley, next slide, please. I guess it's actually Marcy, but we'll go there. So amendments. Just bring this back up to your attention. I mentioned it a little bit before, but amendment, we potentially could be considering some. Maybe we start getting in here and we say, you know what, we need to fix something in our ESSA plan that's related to all of this. Maybe the exit criteria for comprehensive needs to be updated. Maybe there's something in there that we want to take a look at. If we do that, we want to be sure that it's to the Department of Education by February 1st of the year in which you want to implement it for that school year. So anything that we want to be using for the upcoming school year of 21-22, those have to be submitted by February 1st of 21. If it's something for 22, that would be need by February 1st of 2020 to be able to implement. So like I said, those are permanent changes to our ESSA plan. Don't have any in the hopper right now. Marcy, next slide, please. So I've said a lot, talked a lot about acronyms, talked about everything, accountability and accountability system. Here's a Menti question to you. What questions do you have on these 3 separate processes, whether it's addendum, waiver, or amendment, or what do they mean for you? Again, as Ashley had mentioned, the code is up there at the top at the www.menti.com. Hopefully you're still in there.
Great, thank you very much, Julie. That was really comprehensive overview. Yeah, this is an excellent time for you to ask questions on these 3 processes. We know they're complex and there's a lot of information going on in there, and you've got the experts on the call here if you have any questions. So also, this is right at our section kind of transition to the next area in the agenda. So if you don't necessarily want to type it in Menti and just come off mute and ask your question, we're happy to take those at this time.
So Ashley, I'll address that one question that's showing up there. What does this mean for the academic year 1920? So in terms of the addendum, I would say what that means is we've paused the accountability system for the school year 1920, so there'll be no new designations. And so it means that we will maintain a status if you're in comprehensive, and we will not be exiting at this time, and will continue to provide support. And so all that I have mentioned, I can see some things in here. Everything that I've mentioned up to this point, you guys, is very particular to the accountability system. And so Ashley's going to take this off from here in a few minutes. It's going to be completely about the strategic waiver, about moving forward as to what's happening, which is an additional waiver.
There's another question there, Julie, on the left-hand side there in brown, I believe. Do you want to take this at this time?
Sure. So why can't the targeted process be paused until we do have 3 years of data? So bingo, that's why we're asking for the waiver. So really super, super intuitive question there, because it should be paused, right? That's the intention, and that's what we're seeking your feedback on. So should we pause it since we don't have 3 years of data? That's why we're putting in that particular piece about the accountability system. So that is a fabulous, fabulous question.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you guys for submitting those questions in here. Again, if you want to come off mute, that's a great time here at this next section. So what we're going to transition over to is the immediate OPI actions in this section. So some of those strategic moves that we're in process with, some that we've either completed, some that are in progress, and some that are in the works in order to provide schools with relief this academic year. So the first slide here is to really just say the efforts that we're undertaking so that you guys understand where we're at with things. So both comprehensive targeted schools will continue to receive supports and interventions consistent with the school support and improvement plan through the school year. And I think that's an important piece. However, if you have questions on that, because it sounded like there were a few, the next question set we have here is, what questions do you have for OPI services to schools and the continuation of support? So anything on kind of that realm, we would love to know what your questions or concerns are. All right, not seeing any coming in through here at the moment, but again, this is open. It's open for 2 days. So if we don't get to any live or real-time questions on the fly like this, we do have the opportunity to collect your responses and address those at a later point. So please continue to submit your responses as I transition to the next slide. So on this slide, we've got 3 separate columns here, and I just kind of want to talk through these to answer some questions that we had just a moment ago. So first, we've got this blue current slide with a checkbox indicated here, and then we've got this gold column that says in progress with a checkbox, and then we've got the future one. So the two with the checkbox, so the blue and the gold, these are ones that you can count on. And I really want to emphasize that point. So what we know today, as I mentioned with that time stamp with the materials we prepared, as of today, the annual testing requirements are still in place. So that means both federally and from the state perspective, the requirement for participation in these state assessments is required. So one thing that is open right now and happening is the Access for ELS testing. What we did is we extended the testing window for that assessment a month. So it is open until February 26th. This is not included in the strategic waiver process. So it is required that students participate in that through in-person testing. What we want to kind of emphasize is that districts that are planning on proctoring assessments because they have students in their either public schools or their non-public accredited schools, you should plan on delivering tests this winter and spring. Because again, the department may take up to 120 days, at which point all of our test windows would be closed because it would be June 5th. We will make the effort as the OPI to extend test windows where possible. However, I want to kind of put a disclaimer on that because not all test windows are within our control or our domain to make extensions with or add additional dates. Another point I want to share with everybody here that's bolded is that the science field test waiver has been approved. So for that approval status that we received in December, it means that participation in the new science assessments in grades 5 and 8 and 11 is required. However, the pieces for accountability and reporting have been decoupled from those requirements. So those pieces were waived through that process. Then looking over here at that in progress section, one of the activities that is in progress, but you can count on, is the Smarter Balance assessment will be shortened. So the average testing times, historically speaking, for Smarter Balance have been between 6 and 8 hours. You can count on this assessment being between the average testing times of 3 and 4 hours. There will not be a remote proctoring option for any of our state assessments. Another way to term that is at-home testing. And last but not least, so there are concerns about participation broadly speaking, whether that's due to remote learners or due to kind of anything going on with COVID as far as a medical condition. What we will have available is a 1-year medical exception for COVID reasons. And that guidance we will have released the end of this month, and we will have the enhancement included within the MONTCAS application. That is the system that OPI uses to collect that non-participation information. We're anticipating that to be in February. So future activities. So I've alluded to this earlier as far as ESSA process. So if we're looking at ESSA, the section that allows for these waivers, these pauses, as Dr. Julie Merkel was describing, are under section 8401. And we're talking about testing, accountability, and reporting from this academic year. So I want to make it clear that states, so the OPI, cannot act on these waivers, and also districts cannot act on these waivers. The determination has to be made by the U.S. Department of Education. So that's a little bit diving deep into the strategic waivers, where we're at with that. And so I want to pause here to see if you have any questions for the Access for L's requirement or test completions. So if you're, kind of just waiting or in process with that, or you're trying to figure out how to, this would be an opportunity for get some clarification on where we're at with that English language proficiency assessment.
This is Holly. I have to apologize. Our phone rang right when you were talking about the science field test. Am I correct in saying that we will be completing the science field test, but we will not be using it for accountability?
I think that's an accurate statement, Holly. Yeah, so the participation is a required piece, so engaging in that. And then what has been removed is those accountability pieces. So for instance, if we're talking about accountability and reporting, including those results within our ESSA state plan, is that we currently have that. Well, if it's a field test, then one of the things that we really can't make available are those data from the assessment at that aggregate level. And so as far as reporting out or having it within the accountability, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so we're trying out as many of our new item types as possible, and also having a complement of some of the items to allow the opportunities for some feedback to districts. However, as far as our official reporting and publication of that information and GEMS and all of those pieces, you're correct. Those won't be elements of this year's administration for science.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. All right, I'll just turn over here. So the next couple ones here are on science, as well as the medical exception, and also the shortened Smarter Balance assessment. So thank you, Holly, again for your question here. I'm going to move on in the spirit of time, but again, we're capturing all of these, but you can also pause and have yourself come off mute if there's something that you really needed me to answer just this moment. So medical exception, we've had questions on this, kind of that how-to piece. Again, that guidance will be released later this month, and then the application itself to receive that information following the next month. And then the next question, as far as Smarter Balance Blueprint. So again, there's going to be modifications there to shorten it to the average testing time of 3 to 4 hours. So that gets us to this break in the agenda. So before I move on to key documents or resources, any questions, comments, or concerns with that section of the agenda? Not hearing any or seeing any in the chat. So with these PowerPoints, if it's underlined like this, that means that it's a direct hyperlink for you. So you can go right to that resource. So Anne and Julie have done a great job of preparing these materials for the addendum process here. And so you've got the first link for public notice, you've got the addendum process specific timeline, you've got the addendum frequently asked questions or FAQ, and you've got the addendum website there. Similarly, for the strategic waiver process, these links are available as far as the notice to stakeholders, kind of the purpose behind it, the timeline, and then we've kind of disaggregated these into testing, accountability, and reporting FAQs and the Google website. So looking at the FAQ for the addendum process, as far as your reactions to that, I kind of want to just show you guys so you really have, if you haven't seen these yet, can kind of just see how they're laid out to get your questions answered or get you more information with that addendum process and what it means, how it's organized. So this is a great resource to really have that all at your fingertips. So going back here, with that said, you know, as far as information, what we've done here with the Menti tool is giving you the option to submit whether you love these resources or you have questions on these resources, you like them and you found them useful, or you didn't like them and you didn't find them useful. So if you could just use that heart, question, thumbs up, thumbs down, that would give us some feedback to know whether or not these resources are working the way we intended to have them work, or if we need additional guidance or instructions on all of these materials. Thank you for submitting those. It's a great sign when we get thumbs up. All right, so the next set, again, we've got those separated as testing, accountability, and FAQ. So I'm gonna just bounce over to that testing so you can see what's included in here. So kind of the purpose of it, what is happening, then also assessment specific frequently asked questions are included on this document. That graphic as far as the blue, gold, red is included for you. And then the specific laws that we're asking to be paused or waived are included in here, and some of the OPI's actions or service to schools. And then the benefit that's perceived from these, the opportunity to participate in these webinars, potentially other programs impacted by that. Same kind of structure for the accountability one, but here we've got those laws clearly listed and what it means, what is happening with comprehensive and targeted support, and the information there. And the reporting piece. So some of those definitions that Julie was sharing with you earlier, as far as these key differences between the three pieces, they've included that here to kind of give you those definitions. So those are those FAQs. So similarly, you know, do you love it? Do you have questions? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Here is the website for the addendum site. And the same we have for the strategic waiver site. And as I'm going through here, I know I'm going kind of fast here, but I know Marcy's backing me up and putting these links in the chat for you guys so that you have access to the sites or some of those key things we're sharing. So just transitioning over here to any questions you have with the key documents or resources, or did you come up with something that we need to create so it more clearly kind of lists the differences between things, or found it would be helpful to communicate with parents or anything like that? Do you guys have any ideas or questions at this point in time? Great, thanks Marcy for throwing those in the chat for me. So for this section is public comment tools, and I just want to thank Anne in advance for giving us a tour here on these, but a great piece of a resource or opportunity to really think critically about all these activities, what it means for you and what concerns you have are our survey tools. So I'll hand over the ball to you, Anne, and make sure that you've got permission to share.
Thank you, Ashley. Before I start, I'm going to drop a link for the accountability waiver in the survey in the chat. And I really want to emphasize that this is a great way to gather your opinions. I promise you that it's short. And I'm going to take a quick run through it here. Let me just share my screen. Here we are. This is the one related to that backwards look, as Julie was talking about. So this is shifting. This is really adding on to the waivers that we had previously so that we can make sure that the accountability sections are appropriate. So very short questions. And we talk about each piece of the addendum with yes, no's. And then if somebody had concerns, answered yes, or maybe I have concerns, there's a place to put in what those concerns might be. So each of the pieces, moving the timelines for identification for targeted support. And then at the last, we wanted to know, given the amount of uncertainty and difficulty, are there additional future flexibilities that you might suggest related to accountability? And that's where we might get into some of those addendum or amendment aspects. So just a second, and I'll pull up the survey from the strategic waiver. I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat for that as well and share my screen. So this public comment survey is related to the strategic waiver, which is about accountability, assessment, and reporting. So we have a number of questions in here related to those. So why is the OPI pursuing these waivers? What does the process mean? Whom do we contact for technical support? And then if you can automatically receive an email copy for your records if you wish. Let's just pop that in there. And then here's the profile. So what school or organization are you affiliated with to help us understand more about your response, your zip code, the size of school, current role. It's not going to let me go through it without putting in the information. So I'll just suffice it to say that, again, these are some questions that we're using to try and arrive at making sure that people fully understand and if there are concerns, what those concerns might be, and also gaining important feedback as we go forward with these waivers to help us truly understand the impact, because you folks who are here in the webinar, you're where the rubber meets the road, and having your information, having your opinion is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate it. All right, same thing. The click masters here get us back to our place. So the reason we just wanted to share with you what those surveys look like is to kind of give you a little bit under the hood as far as providing us with a response to them. So we've got, as of yesterday, 5 responses to the addendum survey. We'd love to see that grow. As Anne just mentioned, this is really critical for us to have your opinion, your feedback, your concerns, and ultimately helps with the overall application process and can help with our success of all of these efforts. For the public comment survey, for the strategic waivers, there are 63 responses in there right now as of yesterday. And so we wanted to just make sure that we took a moment to see whether or not you supported these efforts. So the first one is, do you support the accountability system addendum process? Great. The next question in there on the strategic waivers, do you support that for testing? How about the waivers, the strategic waivers for the accountability requirements this school year? And the reporting requirements for the strategic waivers. So we're getting a lot of support with these efforts. That's great to hear. So if we look at those yeses for that set of questions, what are some of the benefits these waivers will have to you? And if you can't think of the benefits maybe at this point in time, or you want to chew on that a little, this is open for 2 days and it'll be open after we adjourn today. So I'll just move over here. How about any concerns with those processes? So the addendum process, strategic waiver process. How about any concerns about funding programs? Are there any grants that may be not published in our FAQs or that we didn't think of that depend on student achievement data, or any of these aspects that you're concerned might be jeopardized if approved? Or from a funding standpoint, any programs that, you know, for progress monitoring standpoints, or anything that we need to think about how it can be done differently in the absence of these data? That information would be really helpful for some kind of creative solutions and alternative ideas. All right. Getting a little quiet here. I know it's the end of the day. We probably all have Zoom fatigue here. So last piece is really open forum for the public comment process. This kind of sums up the meat of the agenda. The next section is really just next steps and ways for you to continue to be involved, whether it's another webinar like this or attending one of our conferences. So at this point in the agenda, I just want to pause to see if there's anything that we did not notice on the agenda that you want to raise a concern for. All right, not hearing any, seeing any come in the chat. So here are the next opportunities to get involved or stay connected with us. And if some of this information you really want to stay up to date, some critical updates with the spring assessment, especially with that guidance we just shared on plan on delivering these this spring. We will be hosting the ASSIST conference. That'll be January 28th through the 29th. You'll also be able to get professional learning for the suite of resources to support student achievement. So there will be trainings for formative tools, interim tools, summative tools. There'll be sessions on equity and access. We will have speakers from the assessment unit, but also standards and instruction, school improvement unit, and the data unit. So this is really an OPI collaborative effort, and all of those experts then their respective areas will be at the table to share with you their knowledge and information on those topics. Registration closes January 22nd. So did we meet your needs from participating in today's webinar? And is there anything else that you have concerns on or would be most helpful to you for future meetings?
Ashley, we do have one question in the chat. What is the Tribal Education Caucus?
Julie, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to take a stab?
Answer that, Ashley. So the Tribal Education Caucus is a group of legislators and senators from the state of Montana who are currently in biennial caucus, if you will. And so they meet on Thursdays at 4 o'clock every week, where they come together. They're welcome to join. It's a discussion for them on things that items from the education, if you will, education components that impact our Native American youth on and off reservations. And so they represent the people who make policy decisions regarding education specific to our tribal youth. And so that's just kind of a time when it's almost like a think time. They come together, we present sometimes some information, some data to them that's relevant to topics that are coming up for them. So that's really what the Tribal Caucus is.
Thank you very much, Julie. You did a much more eloquent job of fielding that question than I would have been able to. All right, this is our last and final Menti question here. And so we're gonna stick around till we're the last ones on the phone. But if you guys have any other questions, comments, feedback, we're happy to hear it. But this marks the conclusion of our time with you. Thank you again so much for joining and participating in this webinar.
Julie, do you know how Shadi might get more information on the Tribal Caucus?
Yes, I certainly do. You could reach out to at the Montana OPI to Sarah Swanson. I will put her email in the chat box here so that you have that. But that would be the person from the OPI that you could potentially reach out to find more information about it or ask her some questions. She certainly could provide more perspective. So I will go ahead and put that in the chat box, her email address.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording